So I'm going to try and go through the APIs that we could offer as banks and we could offer as startup banks or as financial new entrants, and look at them and try and dissect what the business models might be behind those. And I'd like to say as a kind of disclaimer, I'm a tech guy, I'm a product guy, I know technology, and I kind of have taken this from that angle and my understanding of marketing. So there could be some gaps where I haven't spotted exact business models. So this is a slide that Simon's used quite a lot in Open Bank Project, and it goes along the lines of, we've seen this a lot of times. Everyone wondered what to do with the website. Eventually everyone had a website. Now you're wondering what to do with an API. And 2015 you said, okay, everyone's going to have an API. And it has come on a long way this year, but it's still not really there. It's not ubiquitous. Not everyone has an API. So if we look behind APIs, and we look at what the business models of APIs could be, we've talked a lot about this open architecture business model. So this open architecture business model is effectively what the App Store, Apple's App Store, is doing. It's giving a platform, everyone gets onto the platform, and then Apple makes a margin on everything that's sold through the platform. So also the developers, they make a cut. So that model works because people have a platform, have a route to market. So it's really excellent. And so the Mondo challenge and everyone else's challenge who build APIs with that model in mind is they have to build a community. So if you're going to take that approach, it's really the community building that's the problem, not the tech, not the kind of everything around it. It's getting enough people interested in your platform. Once you establish that platform, it becomes really sticky, really part of all of those developers' lives. And it gives these guys a route to market. So you're giving them an opportunity to invent stuff and make some money in an easy way instead of spending months and months hacking through functions and pointers and kind of boring stuff like that. If you look at crowdsourcing as a model, this is much more like YouTube, Wikipedia, where the platform, the business model, is about getting content from everyone else. So there are API business models that could also work like this. So if you take crowdsourcing as a platform, you could be getting all of those crowdsource ideas. You could invent, as a bank, a Kickstarter, and then suddenly your brand is much stronger and you get community buy-in, or you kind of get a knock-on benefit. So the business model might be a bit more indirect. YouTube's might be advertising, yours might be new customers or new loans. Marketing as a platform is all about kind of the discount model. So this model of API, you might be aggregating everyone's product offerings and offering them out to your network. But you're building a marketing or a kind of similar model to Groupon. And there are APIs that kind of fit each of these business models. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to map it against what John Muzzer did of programmable web. He did some research that went across all the kind of public APIs, and he split them into these categories. So broadly, free is pretty easy to understand. Banks can offer some quite simple free APIs. Developer gets paid is quite easy to understand. It might be that architecture type model, that open architecture type model. And developer gets paid. Sorry, that's the wrong way around. The developer gets paid. He gets the margin. But the developer might want to pay for a service. So a corporate using corporate banking, over an API, for example. And indirect is everything else. There might be internal APIs. It might be APIs between your phone and your internet banking. That's that type of API. The question is, what are they? What do these APIs look like? So then the free ones, just to kind of orient your thought around the free ones, Google's, Facebook's, the Twitter's APIs, they're there to give you content and let you build on top of it. What they're building is that kind of network effect, that everyone's on their platform, everyone's using them, so there can't be another Twitter very easily because everyone's using Twitter. There can't be another Facebook very easily because everyone's using it. So by building that open architecture, they're kind of locking you in and making it nice and sticky. So there's only a couple of free API sort of categories. BankVal do something to do validations, so simple things like branch validations or finding ATMs. The UK government clearly going to introduce some legislation that makes this offer open account APIs, PSD2. They will become kind of enforced free. They don't have to be free. Like you could still charge if you did something over and above what the API had to offer. And Open Bank Project is a good example of something that's trying to leverage that free and open access to your information. If we look at the developer pays model, again, I'm going to try and orient you in what you kind of already know. With something like Google AdWords, that's quite simple to understand. Everyone searches, everyone places ads, and you get paid per click. So the model of these APIs is that the kind of unit-based approach is per click or per call. The other, PayPal's is a transaction fee. Like you know sort of instinctively how those work. If we look at some of the ones that we could offer as a bank or as a financial institution, maybe this is, I think, where we can really help. Like we can help each other think about what those business models might be. Because the fintechs on one side are thinking about this all the time. Like they can see the Stripe opportunity. Like they can see how successful that could be, and they work it and they work it, and they have a $500 million business. Some of these other ideas are kind of in the organizations, in the banking organizations, but they're not finding a way to hit the ground because of some of that difficulty getting a project up and running, or the infrastructure problems. So clearly in the account data space, there's Yodlee and there's now Teller, but there's other ones like brokers. So if you take a broker portal as an idea, in Ireland it's quite common to have an agent that goes and does mortgages. So a person that goes out and actually sells you a mortgage. And generally when they want to do a quote, they get onto different websites, they do different quotes, and they give the customer a written quote. If they reach some scale, so if they're a successful agent, you could offer them an API. So you could offer them a certain number of calls and give them a band of calls so that they could become more efficient. So you're making their business better and you're driving more mortgages to your business. So that's a pretty easy one, I think, to understand how that developer, the agent, would happily pay for that service because it's made him more efficient. If we look at the freemium type ones, or the aggregated spend data, again, you can offer different tiers. Now BankBox was quite a good example. What they were doing was giving a bank, a kind of community bank in America, more deposits. And they were doing that by offering an API to the crowdsource platforms. So what crowdfunding platforms needed was a way to do escrow. Take monies in, but then distribute them all in one go if the investment reached its kind of level of maturity. So that, as a platform, ended up channeling more deposits into that particular bank. That bank benefited, and so they were willing to pay for that. The crowdfunding platforms, it was easier for them. They were willing to pay for it. So again, the crowdfunders were willing to pay for that API, and lots of banks, I think, missed opportunities are still missing opportunities like that to build a sound business that is doing something as simple as escrow activities, because it lets everyone on the front of it be more scalable. They really do benefit from it. If we look at kind of unit-based options, what could be possibilities in that space, again, Open Bank Project could be something that might be unit-based. So you charge per calls. So Teller's business model might be to charge you a certain number, pence per call. So every time you do a call, you're kind of ratcheting up a cost. But if you look at the upside, what the benefit they're getting, they're willing to pay for that each call. They're willing to do that. So if I could send anyone in this room a payment and it only cost me a penny, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to pay that, right? That's what I'm happy to pay for that service. If I get 2% better rates because I don't have to go through middlemen, again, I'm happy. So that model of unit-based could be really good for Teller, could be really good for a bank because they've got massive volume. So they end up having everyone go through them, and although they're only making a penny on each payment, they've got tons and tons of them. So it still works as a business. Saxo Bank recently launched an API, so a proper bank, and around trading securities. So again, they ended up, I think it looks like they're charging per transaction, not percentage of transaction, but per transaction. It might be £10 per transaction. It's a bit more of a more complicated deal than just a simple payment. Clearly, these other guys that exist are wanting to make a margin. So if you're doing an FX transaction, it looks attractive to take a margin of that whole transfer. And that model there works quite well in the FX market. And I think if I just drill down on Currency Cloud for a second, they're a really, really interesting one for me because At the front end, the kind of TransferWise is what everyone knows, and they've got the kind of network effect of everyone's using TransferWise and transferring money. But Currency Cloud are running the payments, running the FX underneath TransferWise, and they've got the infrastructure network effect. So what they can do then is become the platform for anyone that does FX at the front end. So there's going to be lots and lots of competition with TransferWise and other businesses offering FX at the front end, but it's always going to be Currency Cloud. So then, again, there's a real opportunity for a bank who can see the benefit of being the main transaction processor to offer that Currency Cloud service. So I think that creates a race to the bottom. That creates a model where if there is just one dominant transaction processor and everyone else has lost that fairly high return part of their business, then there will be some consolidation. There will be some banks that have to get out of FX because there's one dominant player. So I think that the risk is that there is a risk to banks losing revenue, but the opportunity is to compete with a Currency Cloud. And that same model can work across lots of lines of business. It could be lending, it could be currency, it could be payments. That same model can work if you want to do the infrastructure network effect. If we look at the developer gets paid, I gave the example of cost per acquisition, cost per click, these kind of models. That can work for banking as well. If we look at some fairly high margin parts of the banking business, mortgages is clearly one that a bank is willing to pay a fairly high cost for, a fairly high per unit fee for. So if you open up an API that lets your mortgages be offered in more places or lets them be aggregated, you can offer to pay them if they give you a possible deal. Now this gets a little bit tricky, this whole space, because it drifts into financial advice and what can you actually do. But if you work through the business, I think you can find there are models here. Things like getting into retail and cross-selling at the point of purchase. So if you're going to go overdrawn, an API, and someone's used it cleverly to offer personal lending at that point instead of high-interest credit lending, and suddenly you're getting more loans coming through your platform than someone else's. So these are clearly opportunities to develop whole new businesses where you take market share, where you sort of develop your business in different ways. I like in the interest of I won't go through them all, but I like the current account switching one. So there's current accounts and switching of current accounts in the UK was pretty ineffective. We're all forced to offer it as a bank, but not much switching has occurred. If an API opens up that makes it really easy, that makes it beneficial to someone in the activity where that API is being used, you might see a much higher account switching. You might see a much higher drift towards Mondo because they offer a really great service in some particular area, and it's a one-click, and everything else happens behind the scenes, and the current account is switched. And this could probably also work as instead of First Direct, they give me as a consumer £100 if I switch. Give it to the developers. If there's £100 on every single account that switches, someone's definitely going to build a business to optimize the way those accounts switch. So I think in First Direct's case, they're probably giving the £100 to the wrong person. If they gave it through the API, they gave it to the person bringing the switching, they might find it was a lot more effective. I'm going to drill into indirect for a minute. And indirect on one side is pretty much all of our internal APIs, like the API to the mobile phone or the APIs between systems inside the bank. But there's also some things like content syndication, which is kind of building of a platform, building of a advertising platform, bringing different people's content together, like different types of mortgages. So there's two that I'll try and highlight and then go into what internal APIs are like. So if you look at crowdfunding, I gave the Kickstarter example. If you acquire all that content, if you had Barclays crowdfunding Kickstarter, suddenly the Barclays brand is incredibly strong and you're returning value to the community, so people want to bank with you. So you're kind of building an indirect return on investment because people value your brand so much more than they would otherwise. If we look at peer-to-peer lending, I tried to identify one that might operate as a SaaS model. because a bank could offer a peer-to-peer lending platform. They could give a place for people to go to do that type of lending. So you might have someone white label your brand, you might offer a white label service, you could spin it up, you could actually offer that software as a service as a bank. There's lots of people doing peer-to-peer lending platforms. There's nothing to stop a bank rethinking itself and doing peer-to-peer lending. And I think most of these API business models kind of take that same approach, that you need to reinvent yourself as a bank, so you stop thinking about yourself as a bank. You start to think about what could you be as a retailer, what could you be as a authorization, trusted source of identity, or there's lots of things that you could do and think about being other than just a bank. I think that's the message we've heard a lot of today. Just to point out, there is already a peer-to-peer lending platform, cloud lending, a lot like Currency Cloud. They're actually offering that as a software as a service. And Money Supermarket is probably a pretty good indication of content syndication, but more popular for insurance. That same model is starting to work for other types of banking products and financial services. So you offer an API that offers up what your products are, and they put it on their marketplace and let people search, which drives more loans towards your business. So now I'm going to have a bit of a dive into internal APIs. So these are the APIs that we saw between the phone and also APIs between systems in the bank. So it's pretty common that the internal APIs are structured into kind of domains, like quite big domains. So if you look inside a big bank, they'll have most of these. They'll certainly have a customer and counterparty model that is shared data across lots of systems. They'll have accounts parts to their system, and they'll have demand deposit accounts, current accounts. They'll have personal lending, credit cards, and they'll generally have one system per box that I'm showing here. Wholesale, that side of banking, there'll be lots of payment systems. They'll have systems for capital markets. They'll certainly have trade finance, fraud, lots and lots of systems. Into group finance, once you do your transactions, you try and figure out whether the bank's profitable, you'll have more systems. You'll have data warehousing systems. You'll have the group treasury function to invest. When you do wealth management, you have your high net worth individuals. They're doing fund management. You're doing life and pension type systems. And that's even before you get to retail. So once you get to retail, you obviously had card systems, you have internet banking and mobile systems. So it's pretty easy to see how complex it gets pretty quickly, because every one of those boxes is connected to the customer domain and the accounts domain usually. So there's just this massive stuff happening inside the bank. And so when it comes to APIs, we've talked a lot about REST type APIs. To me, as a kind of architect, REST APIs are better for user interaction, and some of these interfaces are better as one-way asynchronous messages. So when we heard about Jeff Bezos earlier, what he said was that every service had to be autonomous and asynchronous, and that's what he meant. It should be one message flowing to another system. There can't be dependencies, because once you link systems together and you make a call out to another system, eventually you just get no work done. So it has to be asynchronous. It has to pass the message on to get anything done. So in terms of APIs and what happens at this layer with the mobile phone and that kind of interaction with the channels, a lot of banks that I deal with have an API layer strategy within the channels part for retail and another API strategy for the wealth part and that offering. So they don't have a very well joined up approach on that side of it. But this is by far the largest area of investment, that the interface to the outside world type devices, dealing with the IVRs, and they define things like accounts, payments, and beneficiaries, and some simple resource type objects. Some banks are a bit more forward thinking, but definitely they're looking at this as the vision, that API layer needs to be across all of the professional users as well. So sometimes the professional users are outside the bank, sometimes they're inside the bank. So you're adapting the API based on what they can and can't do, based on their location. So one thing that Temenos is bringing to the table and making it clear what we're not doing is this technology and this kind of what we're calling the hypermedia server, the definition of those conditional links, is something that we think we offer as a kind of technology innovation, but we would never want to be in the gateway layer. It's clearly a lot of good middleware in that space already. So just to orient you in what types of things you should be considering investing in. And we've heard a bit about HAL today and some other kind of hypermedia types that are good in that layer. One thing we've done in that space, in that big blue box, is an open source language that defines APIs. And the best thing about that is not just the aggregation and the mashups and the things that need to happen in that layer, but it's making those links conditional, a way of defining that they can run on any platform. So in this next slot, I'm going to take a little look at the marketplaces and app stores. So we've seen this quote a couple of times, and my take on this is that banks offering app stores is probably not that useful. That's my own personal opinion, because what they're offering isn't of interest to retail customers. I don't want to go to my bank to get an app. But what is interesting is marketplaces connecting the 12 billion of fintech investment to banks. So having a marketplace where great technologies like Teller can hit the ground and run with banks, that is of interest to me. I think that is an interesting view on marketplaces. And to me, that little overlapping part of the diagram there in this Venn diagram is the sweet spot. If you can combine those three models, you can solve that marketplace problem. And so what we're trying to do is work with Openbank to solve that marketplace problem. So as of this conference, we're announcing that we're sponsoring Openbank project. So Temenos and Openbank want to bring our technologies and our ideas together. And we really want to make clever use of the OWealth technology and offer that to our 700 banks that are running the Temenos platform and give them the ability to quickly and rapidly deploy that kind of open API that some of it might be regulatory driven in our region, but other parts of the world could be a unique innovation and drive more customers to their platform. I think it's worth saying that also it can't stop there. We can see it can't stop there. We think that the way we define APIs and the way, making it easy to distribute those APIs, it can create a de facto standard because it's so easy to take the APIs. And I think the message I would offer is that as an established bank, you can compete with the Mondos of the world by having a mechanism to get those innovations to market faster. And it's great for a Temenos existing customer, but it shouldn't stop other customers, other banking customers, getting trusted technology from a significant vendor that understands this space, that is linking together with lots of fintechs. One of our things to try and get those ideas off the ground is the incubator. So we've got the kind of open architecture of Temenos and joining together with Openbank project, and we've got the fintech to try and build that community, build that investment. We've also got the marketplace itself. So Temenos has launched a marketplace this year where we take our $100 million of investment into our platform, and we take all of those fintechs and those the Teller product innovation and give them a route to market. So they're not a marketplace customer yet, but that might be an avenue for them. So if that is a good product that we could offer around the world, let's give 700 banks a chance to take it and take it straight away. We think that will be very much a win-win for everyone. And my final point is just on how that works. So obviously we're attending lots of events, driving the kind of, telling fintechs that there are lots of banking systems they can deploy on. We're making them partners and working out a kind of app store model of a business-to-business marketplace. We're also giving them sandbox systems. So they spin a system up in the cloud, a real banking system that they can develop against, and they can build their software. And some of the time we'll give that away if they're a small startup. And if they're more established, we might give them access to more systems, lots of these sandbox instances, so they can really develop real software and put it into the marketplace. And I think this certification point is one of the most important ones for a bank. They have to know that that software is trusted and reliable and secure. And that's kind of one of the parts that Temenos can add to that picture. And finally, actually the sales effort itself, telling banks what we have and telling people driving their products to them. Thank you for that. It's been great.